And we will get started. So the only unfortunate thing is when I screen share, I can't see the chat. So if you any questions, I'll definitely take the questions at the end of the presentation. But for right now, the only thing that I can really see is the presentation. We'll get started here in a second. All right, well, welcome everybody. My name is Lindsay Hayes, Dr. Lindsay Hayes. I recently finished and got my Ph.D. in August, so it's still weird to say Dr. Lindsay Hayes. But I am a learning scientist, so I focus on how people learn and how people retain information. And I've applied a lot of the learning sciences to the religious sector, especially the Black Christian experience. And my presentation today is really looking at the future of hybrid events and how we're going to be able to mix online and in-person ministries. So a few things that I'm going to go over here today is just some of the drawbacks and benefits of online spaces, hybrid faith networks, and how I believe that individuals are going to be able to create their own networks of their faith networks and faith practices, and then hybrid ministry models and what some models can look like if you plan to continue with online ministry and incorporating in-person ministry at the same time, and what some of those models can look like. So just to start, my theoretical background and where I'm coming from is from the learning sciences. So I'm really looking at this from an higher education perspective, and I'm applying a lot of these concepts to the religious context. So how I view the church is what we call a community of practice in the learning sciences, where you have a community of people who are all centered around the same domain and are practicing the same thing or trying to become better at something. So if you think from like an apprenticeship model of mechanics who might all be coming together and learning the same thing, the church, I believe, it works in a similar way, where we have a similar domain, we have similar content, and we're all coming together and practicing our Christian experience. So we have a group of people surrounded by a body of knowledge, and we are practitioners of that curriculum or of that knowledge. So to start, I'm just going to kind of highlight some of the drawbacks and benefits of online space just to position it, and then we'll get into some of the different hybrid models that might be coming up as we move through this COVID experience together. So for the most part, attitudes towards faith engagement fall within the spectrum. We have traditionalists, we have people who are somewhere in between, and then we have progressives. And I'm not going to go through the, traditionalist perspective and the progressive perspective, because we all know people who are on those different wavelengths. But I really want to focus on the people in between, because by and large, you're going to have people who are right in between either the traditionalist or the progressive perspective. So I broke this down looking at connection, community, content, commitment, and giving. And reach, and how are online spaces really being involved in these different areas. So in terms of connection, the people who are in between that aren't necessarily traditionalists and aren't necessarily progressives when we're talking about online spaces are those who are valuing both in-person and online experiences, and they see the value of both. And I think that's going to be really important for ministries and for pastors and leaders and preachers to really identify, in terms of connection, in terms of connecting with other people, where's the value in the in-person connection and what is the value in the online connection. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the value that comes from online experiences and the value that comes from the in-person experiences. In terms of community, you can have online community groups and in-person community groups, and both of those can work in tandem. In terms of content, the argument for traditionalists or people who think in-person experience is the only way that you can truly engage in faith contexts and faith practices. The content solely comes from one preacher, or you have one shepherd who sees you through your spiritual development, or one church. Whereas with the online, you have several different pastors or several different teachers or experts who are contributing to your body of knowledge. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. commitment or investment. Like, how do I know a parishioner or someone from the congregation is invested in my church or invested, is going to look different for people who are engaging online than it would be for people who are in person. So how commitment and investment is going to look different in the online experience. Giving can take different forms. When you're talking about in-person experiences, giving is more in terms of service, in terms of being a physical body in person, but giving in online or virtual experience might be giving of money instead of time, or it might be a service in an online context. And then lastly, reach. I think people that are somewhere in between the progressive and the traditionalist would say that technology is just a tool, and how we use it. And the internet is a God-given tool, and it really just depends on how we use it. So I just want you to kind of think about where you were before COVID. Were you in the middle? Were you more of a traditionalist? Were you more of a progressive when it came to the online spaces? And to really identify where other people are at the same time, and how have perceptions changed since COVID. So from the traditionalist perspective, of course, the atmosphere of worship and the atmosphere of ritual cannot be replicated online. I did some research studies last year before COVID with millennials who were engaging in these online spaces, and wondering, like, what is the draw, or what's the benefit of participating in person. And by and large, the corporate worship experience just can't be replicated. And having hands laid on you, and touching your neighbor and turning to your neighbor, and all of the physical intimacies that come from corporate worship experience just can't be replicated online. So of course, that's going to be a mainstay. Certain ministries are absolutely really difficult to replicate. You think about a dance ministry, you think about children's church, you think about even praise and worship. It's really hard to replicate that and have the same energy behind it. And for a lot of people, they feel that online church, or what we've been doing in this COVID space, or even before the COVID space, is that there are a lot of distractions at home, or people are multitasking. And research does show that people are multitasking while watching sermons online. If you look up Barna just put out a 2020 study about what is going on, and Reverend Mark shared some of these surveys earlier. But there are studies out there that have shown about multitasking and watching sermons online. Progressives, though, in terms of online ministries, would say that watching multiple services from around the country, church hopping, or being able to catch multiple services, seeing a 9:30 service, an 11:45 service, and even catching a 1 o'clock service that might be on the West Coast, has added to their discipleship, and being able to get multiple perspectives has been important. They see church as more than just a building, and their devotional time isn't necessarily that Sunday morning time, and they're able to listen to a rerun of a church on a Tuesday, or during their commute during work. And for some people, the church experience, because of church hurt, or because they're from a small local community where everyone knows them, that sometimes the experience of going to church can be a distraction in itself. So the online space allows people to have less distractions, and has that one-on-one with that preaching time, where they don't have to worry about, am I wearing the right clothes? Is someone judging me because I'm here, and etc. So I do believe that perceptions have changed. There was definitely a stigma, especially for the younger generation, saying that, not going to church, going to bedside Baptist instead of physically getting up and going to church was lazy. And now with COVID, not having the ability to go to church has really flipped that. And that stigma is not there as strongly as it was. I know when churches open back up that there's still going to be some of that heat for not going into the building. But I think by and large, there's going to be the stigma of not physically going to the building is going to change. And you're going to have people who prefer to go in person, and you're going to have people who continue to prefer being online. And we're trying to find a good way to be able to serve both of those communities, or find a way to serve the people in person, serve the people online, and create some type of hybrid network. So this next part, where I talk about hybrid faith networks, this was a model that I created as part of my dissertation. And just to give you some context about who I studied in my dissertation, I started my dissertation research in January of 2020 before COVID, and I was looking at how millennials were engaging in their faith practices online. And then March happened, and then Easter was when I realized, wow, like the research that I was doing before the pandemic is really going to be important moving forward. because this is going to be our new normal. So the participants that I specifically was studying were Black, female, African-American women. The average age was 28. The age range was between 23 and 35. So that's really the core of the millennial generation. 52% watched church online, and the same amount, 52%, also attended church 1 to 3 times a month, which showed that it wasn't something that people were really choosing to do either or. More than half the people were watching sermons online, and they were still attending services in person when they had the opportunity before COVID. And then in terms of faith community and who they like to have community with and engage with, 38% of people preferred in-person community, 38% of people preferred online engagement, and 24% of people had no preference whether their faith community was online or in person. So this is the model that I created. I call it a hybrid network of practice, and it really speaks to, I think, what the future of faith practices is going to look at. So I want to start, I just want you to think about the shopping experience. So how shops used to be, how the shopping experience used to be was we had these small mom and pop shops, and you used to go different places to get different things, and then enter the Walmarts of the world and enter the Kmarts of the world and these big superstores where you go to one place for everything. And I think the church experience has been very similar to that, where we used to have small local communities and we had churches on every corner, and you would go to your church for what you needed. And then we had the rise of the mega church, or the rise of these larger churches, where it was a one-stop shop and you had 20 or 30 different ministry groups within one church, and you were going to this large duplex for everything. And I think that now that we have moved to this online space, it's going to go back to people having these mom and pop experiences, but not going to one single church for what they need. So just to kind of give you a breakdown of what this looks like in terms of my model that I created. The purple circles are in-person experiences, the yellow circles are online experiences, and the green circles are individual practices that people are engaging with, okay? So what I was able to demonstrate, or what I researched and what my participants told me, and this is pre-COVID, and I think it's really just going to be amplified since COVID, is that they were creating this grab bag, or they were creating their own puzzle, or what I call their own network of practice, that really they picked and choose different things to serve what they needed where they were. So their cornerstone or their main practice was still their in-person local church, and that was what they like sat on and what they was their solid bread and butter. But they were also listening to online sermons. They were also listening to music online. They also had an online group chat that was their faith community that they were engaging with on a weekly basis. They might have had an in-person ministry or an in-person Bible study that they went to, or different concerts or worship experiences that they went to that were in person, but they were getting these things from different places, and it wasn't from one local church where they were getting everything, but it was a mixed bag. And what's important about these networks, and I think that this is what's going to be the wave of the future, is that these networks are dynamic and they're unique to each person. And if there's one thing about the millennial generation that you'll see researchers say in terms of consumerism, in terms of how they buy and how they interact, is they want to be able to create a custom experience for themselves, which kind of goes against what the traditional church in-person experience has been, because millennials are going to look for, okay, I really like this preacher, so I'm going to go to this preacher for that. But I really like the praise and worship from this church, so I'm going to go to them for that. And I really like the Bible study at this church and this preacher's style, so I really like that. The children's church over here works for me, and they're going to create and pick and choose what works for them. That's not to say that for most people or for some people that one church is going to be able to serve them, because that could very well be the case, or they just might be blessed to be in a demographic or in a location where they're able to go to a church that serves them in multiple different ways. But with this online context and with the scope of a lot of content and a lot of sermons and a lot of Bible studies and a lot of children's church now being put online, there's more diversity and there's more ability for people to choose and to customize the experiences that they want that feed their faith. So I say that these hybrid networks are dynamic in saying that they are changing over time. So what feeds somebody in one season might not feed them in the next season, and they're going to seek out resources that feed them in the next season. So the local church might feed them in terms of praise and worship, but in terms of faith community, they might seek out an online resource to find a group of women or to find a group of business owners who are also in their faith and working on something that suits their needs in that extent. So what this slide shows are 4 different networks of practice based on 4 individuals I talked to. The size of the node or the size of the circle shows how much time they spent doing that activity. But you can see that there's this mix of online and in-person experiences that is going to be unique to every individual. I also found that online spaces, they didn't replace the in-person experience, they supplemented it. So it was something that was working in harmony. It was something that was being added into their experience, but not necessarily something that totally cut off what they were doing in person. Right now, everything is online, but this is for whenever we are able to step back into the church building or have these in-person experiences, there's going to be this mix, this hybrid mix of some things are going to be online and some things are going to be in person. But by and large, in-person fellowship remained the cornerstone practice, but it was decentralized, meaning that there were some other experiences other than that sole in-person practice that they engaged in. So the big takeaway here is that people are going to be attracted to your ministry outside of your geographic location. And I think that that's just the globalization mindset, especially for Generation X and millennials, is that just because I can't find it down the street doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I'm going to seek out these resources using this online platform to find it. But it's also important that there are going to be people that are attracted to your ministry or who may have found your ministry online, who now want to continue. I'm sorry, I could have made this bigger the whole time. No, it's the same size. Who want to continue engaging with your ministry, but they're not close to you. So whenever we are able to go back in person, how are you going to continue maintaining the relationships with people who have found your community or found your ministry, but aren't geographically close to you, but want to continue including you in what they've created in their hybrid network in this season? So some of the things about how online spaces can enhance these different practices. So in terms of community, you have to think with online community, it's really important, or a benefit of it is that it provides diverse perspectives. So one of the things a lot of my participants would say is they came from a church where their parents went to, their grandparents went to, the church community had seen them grow up. And it wasn't really a safe space for them to have these wrestling conversations or to talk about or to testify with the struggles that they were going through, because it was a local community. And what the online space does and what these online communities do, or these outside ministries that aren't attached to their local community, it allows them to have diverse perspectives. It allows them to meet people from outside their community where they can have a safe space where they can feel comfortable enough to talk about really what's going on with them and not have the fear that this person knows my dad or this person knows my grandmother. So the online community in which your ministry might be bringing to somebody, even though it's not in their city or not down the street from them, is that they're able to connect with a strong faith community that they feel that they can break down those walls and actually have a safe space to communicate. In terms of domain or content, I talked about this a little bit before, but it expands the network of experts and teachers they have. So I don't just have one shepherd who is fully and solely involved in my spiritual development, but now I have a range from across the country, across the world, of different speakers and different experts who have these sermons online that I can listen to on a regular basis. And it's also, in terms of content, like if I want to go down a rabbit hole and really dig deep into tithing, or really dig deep into giving, really dig deep into relationships, and my pastor or my preacher only spends 2 weeks on that or 4 weeks on that, but I want more, I want to dig in more, the online space allows me to really find content that is important to me, or, just another preacher that takes another angle, or theologically looks at it from a different level. I think that the online space allows people to find things that may not be taught in their area or taught at the depth that they want. So your ministry also could be providing content online that people can't find within their local community. It gives you a diversity of subject matter. Some people just might not approach text the way that you want to hear, or you might hear a different perspective and be able to wrestle with those different perspectives. From a learning standpoint, you want your learners to have diverse perspectives, to be able to either understand what someone else believes, or just to be able to stand in their own truth and say, I hear that perspective, but I'm on this side when it comes to whatever the topic is. And then just having an online encyclopedia of video content, you can always go back and find different things, or just have literally an encyclopedia at your fingertips. And then lastly, in terms of practice and in terms of me being a Christian practitioner, I can access this content anywhere at any time, which I know the downside is always distractions. But when you're thinking about people who might not work the traditional 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, their devotional time might be, during the commute to work. And that's the time that they spend, and your content is now available for them to engage with during their commute. When you're thinking about faith community, not everyone can meet for Tuesday night Bible study for the small groups that are happening in person. But if I can be in a chat group with women or with other people who are in my area or not in my area, but literally it's a 24-hour chat group where I can talk to people about what I'm going through, the doors are always open because it's online. You have access to more tools online, whether it's the Bible app, whether it's a shared Bible study that everyone is doing. You're not just negated to having a piece of paper that everyone got on Tuesday night, and if you weren't there, you don't have it. But now you have this access to a lot of online tools. And then the enhanced sharing of faith resources is really big in the online text. Now inviting your friend to church isn't, you got to get dressed, you got to be ready at 8:30, I'm going to come pick you up, we're going to find a parking spot and we're going to go. Now it's literally, I'm going to send you this link. I listened to it on Sunday. I think it would be great for you. Listen to it sometime this week and let's chat about it after. And literally the sharing of content and the sharing of resources has become extremely easier than the in-person experience. One quote for one of my participants was, I can never put a limit on how much you can do outside of church, because the Sunday service is a very small part of your entire spiritual journey. Like, what happens the other 6 days of the week too? And for me, this quote was really important because it spoke to the fact that the Sunday local in-person experience is not all, even for millennials, is not the full spiritual journey, and that there are more things that are being incorporated into the spiritual disciplines, into the spiritual practices. And it's going to be the case that in the future, all of my spiritual practices might not come from one place. It might not come from my local church, but I might be picking and choosing from online ministries or in-person ministries, online communities, and different things that are making up my entire spiritual journey, which is going to be important for ministries to continue having this online presence, because there are people who, even when they go back to in-person experiences, they're still going to want to connect with your ministry online in some way. Okay, this is the last part. This is the bread and butter, some of the ministry models. So I'm going to start with probably like the most radical model from like a theoretical perspective, and then I'll move into some of the more practical means of what this could look like. So from a teaching perspective, from an education perspective, we call this a flipped classroom model. So for this, we call it a flipped church model. But essentially what it does is it takes what you would traditionally do in person and what you would traditionally do at home, and you flip those. So what you would do at home, you do in person, and what you do in person, you would do at home. So I'm going to start from the educational model, and then I'll switch it over to the church model. So from an educational model, and educators, teachers, professors have been doing this since before COVID, but it's definitely something that has picked up since, it's called a flipped model. So you have the lecturer, you have the preacher, you have the professor. In the traditional model, you come in for the lecture, all the students sit, listen to the lecture, and then you give them practice activities, homework, and they go home and do the homework. In the flip model, you send out the lecture in advance so that at home, the students or the parishioners are watching the sermon, watching the lecture online at home. that gives them the ability to stop and start and rewind and listen to the lecture at their own pace. And then when they're coming in person and when they're congregating, they're doing activities. The normal homework activities would be the classroom activities that they do with others. And when you're with a group and when you're congregating as a group, you are actually taking advantage of the group that's there. From an education perspective, even from a church perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense that we're bringing, and this is really a large church model, it doesn't make a lot of sense that we're bringing a lot of humans into a building for them not to talk to each other. From a learning perspective, learning is a social activity. We learn the most when we're able to talk and dialogue with other people. And to be in a church building where 40 minutes of the hour experience is me sitting and listening and not talking to the other 100 people, the other 50 people, however many people are in the church building, doesn't make a lot of sense from a learning perspective, because what I'm learning, I'm supposed to be dialoguing and talking to other people about. So in terms of what this design model, like what a flipped model does, it allows for more accessibility. So the lecture, I can watch it anytime throughout the week. So say on a Saturday, the sermon goes out, that gives me the full week to listen to the sermon. I can stop it, I can start it, I can listen to it again. I can do my own research, I can look into it. And then when I'm coming into the building on Sunday and I'm meeting with other people, we're all on the same page. So now we can talk, we can discuss, and we can dialogue. Again, learning is a social activity. It's enhanced by sharing your own understandings and hearing the perspectives of others. So that space for dialogue is really, really important. You can retain information, but you lose it a lot quicker if you don't have the space to talk about it. So when you're bringing people into a building, allowing them to use the resources of others and talk to each other really helps the learning process. And this perspective really takes on the fact that people are not an empty vessel that need to be filled, but instead people are vessels that are full of ideas and full of testimony and full of spiritual knowledge that are able to share with others. And of course, they're not doing this on their own. You have ministers, you have deacons, you have other people who are helping to lead the conversations and keep the conversation on track, but you're allowing people to feel that they have a voice and they have a say in the experience. And lastly, the biggest benefit, I believe, is the value to attendance. So I'm going to talk about this in 2 slides, but what value is there for attendance? If the stigma of not physically going to the church building is now gone and there's more of a comfort or allowing people to engage in faith practices online, what is the value of me coming? Now that everyone has tasted this experience and seen that I can experience God and I can have my devotional time on my own, why am I coming? And people are coming to church for the community and for the people. But when you're able to create small groups or create spaces for people to talk to one another and engage with one another, it adds value to the attendance. So a lot of the people who I spoke to said, if I go to church on a Sunday, or if I don't go on a Sunday and instead I do bedside Baptist and I sign in, church is still going to happen. Church as usual is still going to happen. So it doesn't matter if I'm there or not. But whenever you flip it and you send out the lecture in advance, you send out the sermon in advance, and you have these small groups, it adds value to attendance. So now the church experience is not going to be the same if I wasn't there, because my perspective is not going to be there. Or people who I talked to last week, I'm going to be able to give them an update this week, and now that church experience is going to be different. So some hybrid ministry best practices in terms of do's and don'ts, especially if you're thinking about continuing with your online platform, even when you do have people in the building. Definitely making connections and building community is huge, especially for the in-person, but especially for the online perspective. One of the things that we've learned in the education world is it's a lot easier to maintain online community if you have met in person. So if possible, even if they come in one time and that's the only time that they come in person, if possible, allow people to meet in person, and then it's a lot easier to maintain relationships online after you've already made that in-person connection. But of course, if you're talking to people who are across the world and aren't necessarily in your geographic area, it's really important to try to build that community and allow people to introduce themselves and to try to maintain some type of weekly cadence so that you can build those connections. Creating meaningful small groups is really important. And by meaningful, it's not just demographics. Demographics is a great way to create meaningful groups in terms of this is going to be a women's ministry, or this is going to be a men's ministry, or this is going to be for 40s and 50-year-olds, or this is going to be for 18 and under. You can do it by demographic. You can also do it topically or by topic. So this is for single mothers, or this is for people who just want to focus on the Old Testament, or whatever the topic is. This is for college students so that they know that I have some connection to the other people in the groups. Passing the mic, meaning allowing others to talk. Again, the value in attendance is me feeling like I have a voice, especially for millennials in general and Generation X who are coming up. And they've had social media, which is talking back to the internet. So it's not just a newspaper where I don't get to contribute back. But what social media does is they are content creators, and they are able to create and talk back to other people. That's going to be really important in faith practices moving forward, and feeling like there's some value of me being there and I'm able to bring my perspective. Allowing various forms of participation. So not just saying you have to have your video on or you have to talk, but saying, you know, please write your questions in the chat box. Feel free to speak up and turn your microphone on if you want to talk. Having a roadmap of future meetings is really important, knowing what's coming next, knowing that if I decide to sign on next week, I at least have some foreknowledge of what we're going to be talking about. The rise of series has been a really big thing on online preaching now, in terms of this is going to be a 5-part series where we're talking about this. So at least I know next week we're going to build off of what we did last week. And that really helps with the barrier of people who aren't quite bought in, but might be bought in. At least there's not a shock value to what's going to be talked about the next week. And then one thing, I was listening to Reverend Mark earlier, and he was talking about creating new positions that might not have been a part of the church before to really help with digital platforms. And I agreed with that. And having online ushers, I mean, we have in-person ushers who make you feel welcome when you come in, but having someone to man the chat, having someone to man these small groups that are online, and having ushers who might not traditionally have been in-person ushers, but people who are comfortable with the online space, and creating these roles for them to host these online meeting spaces, and having them be ushers. Some don'ts to think about: making participation required. So if you're going to be in this group, you have to turn your video on, you have to talk. That I would say is a turnoff to the online space, especially for people who are peripheral participants. So in the online space, we call them lurkers, or they are on the peripheral of participation, right? They're not your core group. They're people who are kind of lurking in the backspace, and they're trying to figure out, am I comfortable here? Do I like what's going on? Can I see myself being engaged in this group? They're lurkers. You don't want to force lurkers into full participation, because they're lurking and they're trying to figure out, do I feel like I fit here? Do I feel judged here? And is this a safe space? So allowing people to be lurkers, allowing people to peripherally participate on the outside. And because if they are already there and they've signed in, they think they might be interested, but they're not sure yet. So allowing them full access to participation. If you want to hop in, feel free, but also not saying, if you don't turn on your camera, you can't be in here. We want everyone to say hello. We want you just allow people who want to be lurkers to be lurkers, because at some point, if they continue to lurk and they continue to be on the outskirts week in and week out, and they kind of see the flow and they have an idea of what's happening, at some point they're going to want to participate, because they are now feel like they're in a safe space. Don't assume everyone knows each other. Actually, one of the benefits of the online space for some people in the online community is that they like the anonymity. They like that people don't know who they are. They might like that people don't know where they work or who their family is, and that allows them to share more personal things about themselves, especially if you're doing discipling work, or especially if you're doing testimonies, or especially if you're talking about sensitive issues or topics. You don't want to assume that everyone knows each other, but you also don't want to force people to reveal everything about themselves, because that might be why they're connecting with your online ministry. And then especially if you are doing a hybrid model, you don't want to ignore the online community. So when we go back to in-person, you don't want to just be speaking to the people who are in the room and act like that the people who are online are just eavesdropping in. You want to greet the online viewership. You want to say thanks for coming. We hope that you come back next week. We have online ushers available if you have any questions about what's going on. And we would love for you to, come back next week if you're ever in our area, please come in. So this last part is in terms of leveraging in-person activities. So whenever we are able to congregate again in person, the big question for churches and the big question for communities is going to be, what is the benefit? Like, why do I want to engage in person? Especially if safety is an issue, or if safety is no longer an issue. I've been able to connect with my church community online. I've been able to find people online to connect with. What is the benefit of me coming back in person and engaging in person? And churches who want that in-person experience to thrive again, I think that there's two really main areas that they can promote to make sure that in-person community and in-person engagement is revamped once the world opens up. The first of which is service. So service in terms of community service, or just serving the community, benevolence, that is difficult to replicate online in the same ways. We can serve through money, we can serve through through giving, but whenever you talk about impacting your physical world, or being a change agent in your community, or marching for a political stand, or donating, or serving, or visiting people in a hospital, or whatever it is in terms of service or community, that is really hard to replicate online, and it's something that will connect people back to the local church. So if I know that I live in a certain area, or in a certain neighborhood, or a certain community, and my church is doing things that are supporting the upbuilding of that community, I want to physically engage, because I know that they physically need bodies in order to do whatever volunteering or service activity that they're doing. So the churches that are able to highlight service in terms of, we need bodies on the ground to help us put these backpacks together, or to help us with this food drive, those things are going to be something that pull people back into the in-person community. Of course, you have traditionalists who don't need anything. Like, they're waiting for the church doors to open. You won't need to corral them in. But there are people who were kind of in that middle and have kind of moved over to that progressive side to say, I'm good. I have my time with God. I have my church community online. I'm listening to 3 pastors every Sunday. I don't really need to come back in. Highlighting the service and highlighting what your ministry is doing within the community is one of those ways to remind people, we are a body. We are God's feet on the earth. We are supposed to be the ones that are making a physical change in our world. And then the second one, and this one's a little bit more obvious, but it's the authentic community. People are coming because they know that there are people there that care about them. They know that there are people there who are struggling, and they want to offer a word of encouragement. The in-person fellowship, the corporate worship, praise and worship, and just having a body of believers and walking into a sanctuary where you just feel the energy of everyone, and just knowing that you're not the only one that believes deeply what you believe, that's not replicable in an online space. You can see a number and you can say, wow, there's 500 people in this chat, or there's, 2,000 people are watching on YouTube, but it's not the same as when you walk into a space and you see hands raised and you can feel the pulse of your neighbor and you're holding hands in prayer. But having that community of people, and knowing that I'm valued, and knowing that my presence makes a difference. And that kind of goes back to the small group activities, or creating spaces for when congregations are meeting to actually hear the perspectives of the people who are coming, is going to be important, because it's going to add value to my attendance, and I'm going to want to come to church, because it's not going to be church as usual if I'm not there. And with that, I will open it up to questions and discussion. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can look at the chat space again. And you, okay, have any questions? I am open to those. Some of the questions I had that were just open for discussion was, what ministries do you think are the most difficult to translate in an online space? And what hesitations do you have towards this hybrid ministry experience that might be happening in the future? But Are you finding more churches planning to be hybrid? I think so. It was interesting. Reverend Mark earlier was looking at some of the data about pastors reporting that their online engagement has gone up, but at the same time, he pretty much was relaying that the data shows that the reason that there is more engagement is not from unchurched individuals, it's from churched individuals attending multiple services. So he was saying that evangelism isn't being done as much in the online space because even though numbers look like they're up, it's not from the unchurched. It's from those who are already churched, and they're just kind of recycling between different churches and listening to different pastors. So in terms of being hybrid, I think that when the doors open, especially to meet the needs of the traditionalists in their congregations and just to kind of normalize society, they're definitely going to want to go back in person. But I think pastors are also realizing that in the online space, people that normally they wouldn't have been able to attract or normally they wouldn't have been able to reach, they're reaching online. So I think there's going to be hybrid in terms of they're still going to be online and they're still going to be in-person ministry. It's just a matter of what's going to fall off online. I think online things are going to fall off at a larger rate than in person. What percentage of the people that will not return to the building? That I do not know. That's a really good question that I think time will tell. It's honestly, I think it's going to be a matter of safety to start. There is a Barna, let me see if I can put the link in here because I was just looking at this. There is some Barna research out there, but the Barna research was really just looking at some of the people who are already churched. So I think that there's some safety precautions that are underlying perceptions of coming back into the church building that we're not really going to know until we know. So I don't have a percentage. I don't think anyone has a percentage. Right now, the only research we have is how many people are watching online. Hybrid model appears to give all of our churches the ability to have a television ministry. How do they market both? Television ministry in terms of putting the content out in advance. And you mean market both in terms of marketing the online and the in-person? Okay, so for the marketing, the online, I'm a firm believer of your flock finds you based on what you're feeding them, right? Like, if whatever your flock are coming to you for, they're going to continue wanting that. In terms of marketing the in-person, I feel like you're really dealing with two different demographics, right? The in-person community is coming to you because they can physically access you, whereas the online community is coming to you because they really like what you're doing and they can't get that or they haven't found that in their local communities. So in terms of online marketing, you want to market and try to do some small group research into why is it that you come here. And if you're able to pull small groups and figure out we have a lot of people from this area and just asking them what is it that draws you back to us every week and really identifying this is what they like. This is their bread and butter. This is what we do really well. We want to push this. And then for the local community, it could be something entirely different. It could be the people, and that's the draw. It could be the children's ministry, and that's the draw. So I think you can't really answer how to market it unless you know what the different groups are coming for. And that you can only know by doing the small groups and trying to get a feel from your congregation about what is it that you like about what we're doing. Thank you, Chuck, for the question, and Pastor Patricia, appreciate that. And Lois, thank you so much. Online really brings more out of the area people to your site. Absolutely. And that's the benefit of online, is that you have people who might not be within 15-minute radius of your church, might not be within an hour radius of your church, but really like the work that you're doing. and especially out of the country too. That's right, Tina. But I think that those people who are not a part of your community that are visiting, if you're able to get those demographics and find out who those people are and ask what draws you to us, that is what you are doing well. Because for someone out of your area to seek you out means that they can't find something similar in their area, and that must be what you're doing well. And I think a couple more slides on here just to share some older research. Well, I do have a question for you guys. Absolutely. What do you think are the ministries that are the hardest to translate into the online space that you think are mainly or best performed in person? You guys have any experiences or testimonies of ministries or different activities of the church that have been really difficult to translate online? Huger ministries, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, hunger. Yeah, hunger ministries are that goes back to that service point. That's going to be something that is an in-person experience that draws people back to the in-person church. Absolutely. It's been hard to replicate special services. Special services like what do you mean by special services? Like Women's Day, Easter, special services? Special, yeah, like Women's Day, Lay Day. Yeah, I agree with that, Robin. Services, programs, education, after school programs. Children's ministry has been really difficult too, especially for students who have been even hybrid in their schools or on the computer all day. Asking them to engage some more on the computer is really difficult. I think kids especially enjoy the in-personness of their church community, and that's really difficult to replicate. Online is a good supplement, and all the ministries can't be replicated and probably won't ever be. I think it should be used to best spread the word as possible with online spaces. Yeah, I agree. And a lot of the research shows that online is a supplement, and supplement's a really good word, that it's a supplement to the in-person experiences, that it's not one or the other, and people aren't choosing between the two because people realize that online can't fully replicate what's being done in person. But at the same time, to your point, it's able to spread the word at a faster rate, at a larger rate, at a different rate. And there are people who can reach a word online that might not be able to physically reach a local church. We have new members who have really joined our church, and I think it will stay with us when the building's open, but will not be able to come into the building. Think we have to continue hybrid to support them. Yeah, Lewis, that's a really good point. There have been new members that have joined, and they're just not physically able to get to the church. And that's where continuing with online services is going to be important. I would also say trying to create small groups for those individuals, especially those who are not local to the community, so that they can have some sort of community, so that they're not just getting a word, going home or staying home, and not able to dialogue or talk about what they've learned or what, spiritual disciplines they're going through. So I would say, if possible, and especially when people are going back in person, I think that they're going to seek out that community and seek out having some type of connection to others and maybe being able to create a small online group, even if it's like a weekly Zoom or every other week Zoom, for those people who are not, locally connected, would be a really great way to keep them engaged. Gen Z likes the interactive capability of blogs, vlogs, chat, etc. Would you emphasize that as an engagement tool? Absolutely. Engagement for the Gen Z population, even the millennial population, is they want to be heard and they want to feel like they're contributing to whatever is going on. So even the chat box during, during the sermon or during Bible study can be a way for people to engage without having to, have their face on the screen or having to talk. Text groups. One of the ministry groups that I studied, they had a group chat, and it was a women's group chat, a women's millennial group chat, and they were able to share. They did a corporate fast together. They were able to share recipes in there. They were able to share sermons. They were able to share different podcasts and music playlists and things like that. So even if it's not something that takes as much time or energy as a weekly or every other week small group, creating a group chat and allowing people to feel like they can talk freely or have a safe space to share would be a really good way. Vlogs, maybe. That takes a lot of time. So I don't know. If you have that amount of investment, that would be great. But I don't know that you get that much buy-in from that many people to do a vlog or a blog. But I think a group chat is low-hanging fruit for sure. These are great questions, guys. I really appreciate you guys contributing here. And I'm just going to put one more thing on the screen for you. And you can even see. And these are just some online tools that you could possibly share with your congregations. Okay. So here's just some other ways, and I created this before, right when COVID happened, to share with some ministry groups about just different things that if you've not already think about, these are good ways. And you can feel free to screenshot this, or I'll include it in the presentation whenever Reverend LaKesha sends it out. But Facebook is a really great way to broadcast. And I know a lot of churches have started streaming on Facebook, and they also have the chat feature, which makes people feel involved. And you can also see who else is watching on Facebook, which is nice. GroupMe, in terms of group chats, that's a good way. You can have 500 people in one group chat. You can share links, you can share videos, you can share pictures. And that's a nice way to keep people engaged throughout the week. The Bible app has really cool devotionals and reading plans, and you can add people onto those devotionals or plans so you guys can start a devotional or a reading plan together. And you can continue to see how people are progressing. And they also have like a notes at the end of the devotional so that you can put your notes in, like what you got from that week's reading. In terms of fellowship, another one that you can add people to, it's not as big as GroupMe in terms of how many people you can put in a group, but Google Hangouts is a video conferencing tool. It's similar to Zoom, but I believe Google Hangouts is still free. But you can create a Google form and ask people what type of group do you want to be in, what time of day do you want, what day of the week is best, and you can create Hangouts to create these small groups similar to Zoom. But this is just another way to think about this. And of course, free conference call is another way if you have one person speaking for the most part, to be able to share. One of the newest social media platforms that they just came out with is called Clubhouse. That one is probably more for the millennials, Gen Z, who want a space to be able to talk back to the speaker. So it's kind of like a stage platform where you have moderators who have an open mic, and then if you raise your hand, you can come up to the stage and speak. But that's a new one that is gaining some traction now too. I hope that helps. And then the last thing I'll put up is just my contact info. And you can feel free to email me, or I do have a website with that same tool that I just put on there. If you want to forward that to anybody, you can email me or check out my website or contact me if you have any other questions, or if you know anybody who'd be interested in this work, or just talking about different ideas for ministries, especially moving from the online space back into this hybrid online in-person space as well. I think we're wrapping up here. Anyone know what time we are done with this? I think it's 4:30. Absolutely, guys. Thanks for joining. I hope this helps. Please share with all your ministry leaders, and if anyone has any questions, I'm always here to help. I'm still at Penn State. Yeah, I'm at Penn State, which is different from Penn. Penn is in Philly. Penn State is in Central PA at State College. But yes, I'm still at Penn State. We're remote, but we're still there. Absolutely. Thanks for stopping by, Pastor Patricia. Thanks, Tina and Chuck. Yeah, absolutely. My home is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so I'm traveling through the state often. So absolutely. Where's your church? I'm a native of Pittsburgh. Montgomery County. Yeah, I have some friends in the Philadelphia area. So absolutely. Yeah, please take my email down and let me know what time of year would be best, and we can definitely. Zoom is even better. Easier commute. That works for me. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Robin. Yeah, please be in touch. I would love to help. Love to help. Yeah, if you have any questions, please go ahead in the chat. Anything specific to your ministry or congregation that you've been thinking through, feel free to type in the chat. And I'll stick around for a couple more minutes and take any questions that you might have. Yeah, a lot of my research for my dissertation mainly focused on millennials, especially Black millennial women. That's my core group, and that's the future of the leadership of the church. So I think that that's really important to understand more about who they are and their tendencies. But I think that the network, the hybrid networks, is going to be the future, and people really creating these networks and pockets of what works for them in terms of ministry experiences that might not all come from one centralized location. I do not have a book. I just finished my dissertation in August. I haven't opened up Microsoft Word since. I'm taking some time to smell outside and not be in front of a computer screen for hours at a time. But yes, I will write. I will write. I will try. I will try. Thank you for that. There is a book out there by Brianna Parker called What Google Can't Give. What Google Can't Give. She wrote that probably 2 years ago. I think she has another book coming out, and that really focuses on what ministries can do outside of the online experience. Yeah, yeah, I read through that for my dissertation. I think she has another one coming out actually.